All right, today is January 3rd, 2021, the start of the new year, and we're continuing our discussion on the Extinctionati, Desiderata Extinctionati. And we have a few, or looks like we want to have a discussion on the emotional literacy and feelings. And if you guys, did you guys take a look at what Sophie posted? And also Gary posted a few things too. Um, so do you guys want to start the discussion with that?
Yeah, this is a
Um,
topic. It's like we
Hugh, did
go out for this.
um, I thought we could begin with what Sophie said, but just before that, uh, um, is it worthwhile trying to give it a definition of what emotions are, how they arise, just what we're dealing with? Because see, everybody sort of assumes you assume we know what we're talking about. You know?
I would like to do that because, yeah, I mean, I really feel that emotions are one of those things where people just have preconceptions that we're all on the same page and talking about the same thing, and it's very, very unlikely. People's idea of emotions and feelings and stuff, it's amazing. All our life is emotions and feelings, really. And what they are and what they mean to different people is so different. What they just the gender divide, what it means to women and men, and women are way more in touch with their body and have all sorts of feelings that men just never get. And so it's basically we are these big chemistry sets. But I think the first thing to say is to ground it in biology, because you get absolutely nowhere if you go into the metaphysics. So what the philosophers in that were always said when they investigated feelings and that they would have these arguments saying, well, what they called qualia, they're just things you experience. And then they would say, well, they would have all these arguments. Does Mike see blue the same way I see? And then all this kind of, and you can go round and round in circles. There's no way to ground it, but you can ground it very quickly in biology. And basically, all the emotions they're basically associated with hormones and neurotransmitters. So but it's all to do with the neurochemistry. So it's just fluctuations in this, massive chemistry set that we just basically a petri dish full of chemicals. And it's kind of weird because if you get, everybody knows what the feeling is to be hungry or something, and they know it's leptin. If you get deprived of leptin, they can take the leptin out of you, and you will eat your arm, literally. You will bite the person next to you. You'll get so hungry. So the first thing about emotions is they are naturally evolved to give you motion. I mean, I looked up the etymological definition of emotion, and that's literally it. It's to move, to make things move. Now, what I thought was really funny was, I was trying to get back to the Proto-Indo-European root, the Aryan root of the word, and the root is to push away. And the thing, and the root is mu, is the Sanskrit root. It's like mir, mir is the Sanskrit root. So it's literally the first emotion we have is disgust, pushing it away, mir. And so yeah, so I want to say a lot about this, but the first thing I would encourage us to do, or what I would like to do if everybody's okay with it, is to approach it from the point of view of the 5-layered brain theory. So if you take Sophie's thing, if you an exercise like that's very valuable, basically to become conscious of your feelings and stuff. I think what you're really doing with an exercise like that is our alien cortex is mainly suppressing the other 4 layers. So all the feelings, the alien cortex has some feelings, but they're kind of exalted feelings. I'll come back to that later. But in terms of most of the emotions that people have on an everyday basis, they lower down in the stack. And so I think rather than just, doing little circles and saying, I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that and stuff, it's far more valuable, especially to objectify the feelings. Yeah, I mean, obviously the exercise, pen in hand on paper, is an exercise for the benefit of your alien cortex. So it, it can see the emotions, it can acknowledge them, basically it can objectify them, and that's what your alien cortex is doing with an exercise like that. So say straight away, you can do a better job if you apply it to the 5-layered brain theory. So let me give you an example of some of the emotions. So it works tremendously well once you get into it, because you can go back in evolution and you can go into neurology. You can actually find all the hormones involved and the neurotransmitters and things like noradrenaline and dopamine and serotonin and all these massively important chemicals that are, they're not giving us these feelings. They're changing our mode of operation of our brain. They're kicking it into different gears, in other words. So I mentioned this in one of the writings that I was saying about the layered brain stuff that I started writing and posting on ExonMed, is that you have a neural network. Now, when they normally do a neural network on a computer, it's flat and two-dimensional. So what we're doing with emotionals is we're taking that same flat neural net, and if you pump it full of different hormones that changes the electropotential in the synapses, you're getting a new pathways. For each new transmitter, you get an entirely new mode. So that basically when, say, electrical signal would take one path through your neural network in your brain, if I put another neurotransmitter, say noradrenaline, then those very same neural networks will be repurposed to take a different path. So I don't think neurologists realize this. I only realize it because I've done it with computers a lot. But I think there's a blind spot where neurologists are not putting these two together. Because if they did, they would see why the human brain is so fantastic, why AI will never catch up with it. It's because it's a combinational explosion. It's combinatorial explosion. If I take a very simple neural net that basically can identify a cat or a dog picture and do an output of a C or a D. If I have, two sets of chemicals that I can change that, I can make those same neurons do an entirely different job. And as I add neurotransmitters or just a chemical bath that I put those neurons in, you're getting the square each time, the square of the square of the square, and it goes fantastically big very quickly. So I think that's okay, a basic model of probably what is happening neurologically with your emotions. Now, in terms of evolution, they know from experiments how they started out. And basically, the essential things, because it's in motion, it's getting you in motion. So ethologists will look at a little fish, and they've done basic experiments to see, what gives a fish emotion. In other words, it reacts, and it's all fixed action patterns, right? So and let's start with the fish, because that's the fish layer is the first layer. It's everything, your autonomic nervous system, and particularly the basics of fight and flight are there. So what they did with fish is they present a little spot, a little shadow on its right side. And they found that if they present a shadow that's small, it has a fixed action pattern to turn towards it, thinking it's food. And then basically if they show something that's larger, then it looks like a threat and they turn away. And they can actually grade precisely the point where it flips over, and there's all very interesting stuff, research. But what is that fish actually feeling? Well, they know because the fish has the same neurons that we do. They work the same way. They're the same chemicals in operation. They go all the way back to the fish. Things like particularly things like dopamine and the other one, which I can't forget. Anyway, the
Cortisol?
no,
Cortisol.
no,
No?
the one that makes you pursue things, makes you feel good.
Serotonin.
Serotonin, yes, serotonin. Serotonin is the big one, right? Basically, plants used serotonin probably as a defense against insects. It was probably a poison for certain insects, but because, say, fruits and stuff exuded serotonin, it flipped in some animals, including our ancestors, so that it became an attractor for us, and we found fruit by following serotonin gradients. And so that's what we're doing in most of life. When we go to McDonald's and get a burger, we're getting serotonin. Normally, you get serotonin from food you eat. We don't really manufacture it all that much because it would not be good to manufacture it. It helps us to go out and pursue a Big Mac. And then it's in fruit and vegetables and stuff like that. So it's kind of your body's way of saying you have a lack, and you go out there and pursue it. And it's doing, everything from when people get on a plane and go and have a holiday in the sun and stuff. It's serotonin. You could change their behavior, and they would stay at home if you just had a drip in their arm and change their serotonin level. Now that's the first thing that people don't like to admit, is how much of a chemistry set we actually are. They feel these emotions personally, and they very much feel like I am my emotions, and I get very involved in it. And this must go into this in a big way. But where I'm going with all this is, because the science is so well founded, it really pays, and it's also kind of intuitive. It really pays to look at it from the 5-layer brain model if you do an exercise like so. So in one of my videos, the one I think about shamans and eupsychosis, I think it was 4, I think maybe 4 and 5, something like that. 3 and 4, I don't know, no, 4, 5, whatever those episodes were. It was 4. I think it was in 2 parts, and then I gave this exercise, which I'll present again because I think this is more useful than Sophie's exercise, but you could do it in the context of Sophie's exercise. So this is it. I say, when you analyze each one of these emotions, attribute it to one of the 5 layers. So when you think I'm feeling this or that or the other, and you write it down on paper, say what layer it is, right? So, you might be sitting there thinking, hey, I need a ham sandwich. Really that's at the fish brain layer. All the chemicals, say, in the reptilian brain, they the things for the 4 Fs, feeding, fight, flight, fight, and freeze, fuck, basically 5, I think. But all of those are mediated by things like adrenaline and stuff like that, and you know what it is to get a shot of adrenaline, and it gives you an idea of what it must be like to be a reptile. That they must be all the time, in the dinosaur age, they must always be having these kind of feelings of racing heart and all these kind of things that are come from all these basic responses from the reptilian brain. By the time you get to the mammalian brain, then you get into things that a reptile just didn't need or didn't have, and that's things like love and empathy and all the mammalian brain traits. It's the first time oxytocin comes in, and oxytocin is good for bonding, and it's called the cuddle chemical. There are a lot of other things that people don't like associating with it, like it has a lot of xenophobia and things in the out group. There's maternal rage. It's not all cuddly, right? But it's a complicated neurotransmitter, and hormone. It's really responsible, especially for a lot of motivations in females, right? And so women are really in touch with all that kind of thing. And then in the primate brain, you have all these kind of things like social anxiety, pride, and all these things that come with status and social interactions, essentially in a monkey troop. And and then when you get to the alien cortex, then I don't believe that many people get many emotions in the alien cortex, but it is capable of doing that. And some things like religious feelings and that are your alien cortex is capable of feeling. Now, I spoke about those seven layers, and how at do re mi there's a semi-interval, and there's a big change, realization or enlightenment. It's kind of like a rewiring of your brain, and there's a definite point there where you open up higher emotions. So in the cult I was in, they kind of shocked people because early on they would tell you something which blows people away, but is true nonetheless. And that's, they say that you have ordinary emotions and you have higher emotions. Now, not everybody has high emotions. You achieve those after enlightenment, but there's a whole, it's kind of like a new language of emotions. Now everybody goes, well, I like everybody thinks they feel things more than their fellow man and stuff. But it's almost an insult to people to say, yeah, you're only painting with half the color spectrum. And they're like, oh, bullshit. Yeah, you don't know how strong my feelings are. You're saying, yeah, it's kind of like you brought up in a manor house. Say like in these old Cape Dutch houses in the slave plantations in the Cape, they would speak kitchen Dutch in the kitchen. Now, there's a whole other form of Dutch which would go up in the upper stories in the dining room and stuff where all the gentry live. Now, it's kind of like you brought up in the kitchen with kitchen Dutch, and then you tell people, yeah, there's a different kind of Dutch that people talk upstairs. And they're like, fuck off. I was like, I know Dutch, and I'm speaking to you. Tell me how I'm. They get all upset with it, but you say, yeah, there is a whole different language, but, and 50% of the, so you get there through enlightenment. But to give you an idea of some of the alien cortex's emotions, I think they're really only accessible because in enlightenment you really do rewire your brain. You have a different connectome. I've said before, it's like, it seems to be a truncated hierarchy. It's roughly a hierarchy in the average person. After enlightenment, I think neurologists, if they tried to look at it, I think they could even show that it is now a fully a full pyramid with a capstone on the top kind of thing. And I think there's definitely a difference in people's brain wiring after enlightenment. It's actually that physical. It's not an abstract thing. So and then what does those feelings look like? Well, it's kind of like Einstein had like this happy thought. As he described it as happy thought, that it was basically the thought experiment that he realized suddenly that falling in an elevator under the force of gravity is indistinguishable from acceleration, and then that led to the general theory of, and he said that came to him in a flash, and he had this this wonderful feeling, and then that he called his happy thought. But those kind of happy thoughts happen to mathematicians and religious saints and stuff like that, the reason why I say that they kick in, after enlightenment, if you take somebody, it's a good reference point, say like Freud. He never made it past the me, do re mi, the third chakra. They often say they know Freud never made it past the third chakra. Now, Jung did. Now, Jung clearly communicates this kind of oceanic feeling that he said is associated with babies feel it in childhood. And Jung wrote about it, I think, in Civilization and its Contents. He wrote about this thing that this guy told him, that he had religious feelings, and he had this amazing, wonderful, oceanic feeling. And Freud was baffled. He said he's never had a feeling like that in his life. He can't even imagine what it was like. And so I just put that out there as kind of like those higher emotions. There's a high emotion of love, and then the very basic ones that you would attribute to basically our fish brain. So it's very useful, I think, to then sit down, and when you're doing any kind of analysis of your feelings like that, is you should try and identify at what layer it comes in on. It releases a whole bunch of information if you do that. So does that make sense? Or do people feel they don't have an intuitive feel of each layer, and they couldn't come up with a feeling and attribute it to a brain layer on 5 layers? Because I feel like everybody. My assumption is everybody has an intuitive feeling. Like what? Maybe it's just me and it's idiosyncratic, but I hope everybody's got an idea of things like, if you've ever seen monkeys or gorillas reacting and stuff, you can see what their emotions are. And it's very easy to say, like, well, that doesn't really happen in, say, ordinary mammals, say a shrew or something like that. You can see that there are some emotions that a gorilla is feeling and we feel, but a shrew doesn't really feel that. And then you can see, say a lizard, a crocodile or something like that. You would know there's a whole catalog of feelings you could never attribute to. So, yeah, I'll stop talking soon. But I just want to say, just on this topic now, if they're neurologists and stuff, anybody biologists listen to this, they'd freak out, because we have a tradition in the Western world that came from the 20th century that you can't anthropomorphize what a reptile is feeling. You can't say what a crocodile is so different to us. You can't anthropomorphize that way, and they beat that into students. It's horseshit. And the reason that's horseshit is I can go to a fish and do an experiment. You can, neurologists look at the parts of the brain, the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. They preserved right into a shark. We can see that we have analytes. We have an amygdala. It's exactly the same as the amygdala in a reptile. You can do experiments with all the hormones, the noradrenaline and those kind of things, cortisol, all those kind of things, and you can see that they have exactly the same flight and fight. Their heart speeds up. They, has the same effect on them. So just fucking looks like a duck, walks like a duck. Call it a fucking duck. You know that a crocodile heart leaps in its throat, just like you when you get a call from the boss or a letter from the IRS. You know what a reptile is feeling. I mean, I would challenge neurologists on saying that they're being deliberately thick, because you can say, you can go to a nematoid worm or C. elegans and do experiments on it and look at the reaction from the standard neurochemical set, and you can just assume that it has the qualia. And I would go further and say that you can do an experimental proof on yourself, because if you say drink alcohol or some sedative, the layered brain shuts down from the top. So if you go, they say alcohol's a social lubricant, because you go out and have a drink with friends, you start knocking them back, and it knocks out your alien cortex. So basically your alien cortex stops inhibiting the lower brain layers so hard. The first thing that happens is people start to feel very pally, and all that social cohesion and bonhomie, it comes from the primate brain. Right? You know that crocodiles do not feel social bonhomie or friends with fellow crocodiles. So I hope you're getting a feel for this. So as you drink more and more alcohol, you eventually you will get down to a thing where you get to fight response, and and then you can see guys doing this in a bar. They're going down to the reptilian brain, and then eventually they have so much alcohol, basically they'll black out. And basically they're down to their autonomic nervous system. Basically they're down to the fish layer, and then they pass out. Now, if you've ever got drunk enough to pass out, you'll know that the feelings never change. Basically, if you feel as sick as a dog, if I give you something that smells repulsive or disgusting, the feeling of disgust, when you feel each one of those feelings, they feel identical. No matter what layer in the progression down, your alcoholic stupor is, they never change. It's not like, say, you're tasting pickles, which maybe when you're half asleep, pickles taste different to when you're really feeling over the moon. It's basically, pickles taste like pickles, and feelings are feelings. If you feel like you've been poisoned and you feel like shit, it doesn't matter how drunk you are. If you feel that, it feels exactly the same in terms of the qualia. So it's easy to extract that to an animal and get over this gestalt bullshit that's saying we can't know what an animal is. Say, yeah, of course you can know. Because so I'll just give you one more reason why they say all this. So there was a lot of this, is what does an animal feel and stuff, in the late 19th century and early 20th century. So you got guys like Wittgenstein saying things like, if a lion could talk, we could not understand him. And everybody go, oh, Wittgenstein, genius, what does he mean? And it's like, it's horseshit. Basically, a lion basically has everything we have up to the mammalian brain. So you can attribute to it. You know exactly what it is to be like a lion. If you have the nouns and have the practice attributing things, you know exactly what the feelings are associated with everything up to the mammalian brain. And so you know exactly how to be. So one reason why they abandoned this idea that you could possibly understand what it is to be an animal was, you remember those guys, the cyberneticists I talked about in one video back a while back, and those guys were very important. Their impact on the 20th century was huge, which is rather strange considering that very few people know about them. But the Gregory Bateson and Mary Mead, they're very, very important figures. They were anthropologists. They shaped anthropology. They shaped the Gestalt movement and things like this. Very important neurology. Now, what they did early in the 50s was the first time they started to do neurological. They did some of the first neurological studies where they stick electrodes in a frog's brain, and they thought, now we're finally going to unlock the secret. Now, it might, if you're younger today, this might feel like, what are these people smoking? But you must remember that back in the early 20th century, even back in the 70s, they would have like movies like The Day of the Dolphin, and people would try and talk to dolphins. So they knew so little about a dolphin that they'd say, like, maybe dolphins are as clever as us. We don't know. And they'd say, maybe if we learn to teach them how to speak, maybe we can have intelligent conversations. Maybe we can, talk philosophy to Flipper. And they were really that stupid even in the 1970s. But even more so in the 1950s was this idea of, like Wittgenstein, people would say, like, what would it be like to be a bat or a lion? And then Wittgenstein said, well, if a bat could talk, if a lion could talk, then he could tell us, we could know. And they would argue if what they said we could believe, and Wittgenstein said, no, a lion would talk, but we couldn't understand what he was saying. It's like horseshit. So Gregory Bates and Margaret Mead, and then they very excitedly now think they're going to solve this mystery of the philosophers of the ages. They stick electrodes in a frog's brain, and now they're going to see, what does a frog think of a fly? And so they were amazed, because they presented a fly to the frog thinking, well, we're going to see frog-fly thoughts. We can see whether they're the same as our thoughts. And what they found was a frog is actually completely blind to a fly. They didn't realize that. What they found was a frog doesn't have a damn clue what a fly is. All it says is, if they just pass an object of the right size from left to right at exactly the right speed, the frog, just almost like an electronic, basically just a clockwork mechanism, a fixed action response. The frog, it doesn't matter whether it's hungry or what, if it just sees something going left to right at just a very, very narrow range of speed, its tongue leaps out as a fixed action pattern, and that's it. What they found was, if they have a fly crawling around or something like that, if it's not going at exactly the right speed in that, there's nothing going on in the frog's brain. The frog's brain is absolutely dead. So then from that, they concluded, fuck, there's nothing going on here. It's about as much as a pocket calculator. And so then they said, you can't go and do what all these philosophers did, and they were wasting their time in past centuries trying to say, imagine what it was like to be a bat, because basically saying a bat's just so different from us, and the way their neurons are operating, it's just you can't imagine. So then they went too far, and they started. Now today it's like they say like now they go on the opposite way, saying that animals don't have the feelings that we have, and you say like, oh, that's crap. I mean, come on. We've got to the stage where there's a stalemate. You're forbidden to say anthropomorphize about animals, but neurologists are clearly showing that they walk like a duck, they talk like a duck. So so where I'm going with all of this is, if you examining yourself, it really helps to remember that we're just freaking animals. And the 5 brain layer there will give you huge insights and a kind of objectivity that will bring you much closer to enlightenment. So sorry for talking so long, but I didn't know how to. I thought I must communicate all that to you in one go. But anyway, so I better let everybody else speak now.
Do you mean to say that emotions are arising without any brain processing occurring? I mean, there's some perceived event by the senses, and then there's a felt response, but there's no intermediate processing and decision making or assessment. It's just frog-like. The frog and the fly.
As you go down the stack, they are reactive. I mean, they're called emotions because they emote motion. Basically, the root is like motivate. It's motile. It's basically to cause movement in you. So it's all emotions are reactions, which is worth remembering if you're a psychologist and you're going, oh, well, tell me how you feel and how do you feel about your mother. And it's like, it's kind of like what you feel if you feel adrenaline or something like that. It's kind of in psychology today, it's kind of like the color blue, or the symbol for a hex or something. It's basically the symbol for Saturn. It's that abstract for them. It's emotions don't come out of the blue like that. It's basically they're very integrated in certain parts. Now it gets complicated quickly because we've got a lot of neural processing going on, and a lot of the stuff is kind of echoes. So you have all these echoes and aftershocks and this huge circularity where one thing is knocking off another and stuff like that. You clearly see it in higher primates. If you look at baboons, or if you spend any time watching, gorillas or monkeys or something, rhesus macaques and stuff, you can see them do it as a collective. So there's something that I must come back to that about how individual our brains is. So that's another myth, a cultural myth we have, that our brains are here, and it's not. There's part of this exercise is connecting you back to the universe, because we have this fucked up illusion given to us by our alien cortex that we're separate, but we're not. I'll come back to that. The thing I was saying about rhesus macaques and that, if you observe them, you can see these kind of echoes going. You must see a monkey troop as a collective brain. You can't look at one monkey and say, oh, that's Fred. I'm watching Fred and trying to imagine what's going on in Fred. You'll soon see that what goes on in Fred's brain is horizontally connected with everybody around him. So basically, and you can see these kind of ripples go through. So you can see, very unaware couples, very unself-aware couples. You can see them in an airport or a bus stop or a coffee shop, and they'll be doing this just like a primate. Basically, somebody will do this, the other one will react. They'll go in and go bing bong, bing bong, bing bong, bing bong, bing bong until they settle down again. And they're just pure monkeys. So now that, you know, kind of reciprocal bouncing thing happens between the layers, so that your alien cortex can think a very, very abstract thought about my death or the end of the world or doomerism or, you know, is the stock market going to crash? And it's closely connected to the amygdala. So the amygdala then has a much simpler response thing, and that it's evolved to basically for dinosaurs ambushing you. So all it knows is, oh, I know this little circuit. This is the circuit that we're in deep shit. And so then it goes, oh, we're in deep shit, and starts pumping out all these chemicals. Basically, they all start chemical cascades and things like that. But it starts putting out adrenaline because you're sitting in a comfortable chair on the beach thinking about the stock market. And your amygdala can be going like the clappers putting out adrenaline or something. Because it's reciprocally wired. So yeah, I just want to say that because help you with your observation of all these things. You can get to a point where you start to know yourself like a kiddie's train track, and you know how it wires together, and that's a very good place to get to. Since while I'm thinking about it, the way it works is the higher layers are not really enhancing or elaborating on the lower layers. The full package is in the lower layers. So basically everything you do, think everything is motivating you is in the spinal cord and pretty much around the fish layer. It's not like then we have an upgrade and we have a reptilian brain on top and we have a whole lot of new stuff. Well, you have new modes of feeling, but in general, the lower brain layers are far more powerful. It's like a horse and rider. In general, a horse will submit to the rider. The rider is really suppressing the horse's instincts. But if the horse gets triggered, if it sees a snake or something, the rider cannot override the horse when it goes into its powering horse mode. And that's generally how it works all the way down our brain line. Now, we're getting to a tipping point with the human brain. And that tipping point means we can actually override our autonomic nervous system. Now, that is just freaky shit. Because evolutionary speaking, this is all wrong. You shouldn't be able to do that, not even close. It's not good for you in a normal course of events. It would be fatal for most animals to have the ability to abstractly control their nervous system. So anyway, so it has to be qualified with some people can absolutely override every layer of their brain to the point of death. You know, they could stop themselves breathing till they died. You know, it's good. But that's freaky stuff. In general, for most people, you will not be able to hold your breath just with an act of will. The carbon dioxide will build up in the lining of your lungs. That'll tell the parts of your fish brain and say, like, we're in deep trouble down here in lung territory. The fish brain will say, like, okay, this is serious shit. There's no brain layer. If the fish brain layer seldom gets activated in that way, but if it goes into alarm mode, then the normal speak in the upper layer shouldn't be able to override it. There would be, the lower layer would overthrow the upper layers. Now, when it's business as usual, then the upper layers are suppressing. So your alien cortex it's not a brilliant add-on to this, fruitcake layered ice cream. It's actually just suppressing. It's inhibiting the lower layers. So the primary difference really between us and primates in terms of feelings is primates have no control of their feelings. The gorillas and stuff like that, they're highly reactionary. Their whole life is just one hell of reactions and hysterical emotions. it's basically you would have to be in Bedlam. You would have to be like in a mental asylum with people going nuts all the time, and that gives you an idea of what it's like as a gorilla. It's just intolerable for us, for most of us. But the reason why we don't feel that way is because we developed an alien cortex, and it's suppressing all of that, and that's why we can get on a plane without going batshit crazy and ripping all the fellow passengers apart, because we're suppressing the instincts that are definitely there, but we control them. Basically, you can see how well they're controlled, because if you're sitting on a plane or a bus or a tube or a confined space, it's hell for a primate. Your primate brain is really anxious in those areas, even if it's habituated to them. If somebody comes and sits next to you on the plane, you feel a little bit uncomfortable. If you get into an elevator, everybody faces the front. By convention, they don't want to have eye contact with strangers, and the reason is their primate brain is saying, breathe deeply. We'll get through this. We shouldn't be this close to a bunch of other primates in this thing. This is a really, really bad. If you did that to a bunch of primates that didn't know each other, like put 10 of them in an elevator, by the time they got 10 floors, there would be a bloodbath. So the only reason why we can do it is because our alien cortex is suppressing that still functional layer, but it's inhibiting it, so we can go about our daily lives like that in a modern urban setting. And that's what's made places like New York, the fact that we can do that. So that's the one thing. Final thing. Sorry, I'm going on so much here, but this is a big subject. The final thing I want to say is one of the myths we have is that our brain's kind of separate. So we're saying, psychologists, neurologists, they study the human brain as an individual thing, as if it's a universe in itself and it's completely isolated. And it doesn't work like that. You can go into a restaurant or a public place. Remember those days, how you used to be able to do that? And you can see how our collective brain works. In a restaurant, it's fractal, because in each one of the patrons' heads, you get something like the whole restaurant. And what I mean by that is, look at a restaurant. The next time you go in, you can see one guy at the door. He's regulating the customers coming in. There's one guy on the till. There's some shit going on in the kitchen. People throwing plates. Waiters coming in. But it's a microcosm of what's going on in your head. Each one of those, what's going on in the waiter's head, you actually have almost a little homunculus of waiters running around your head, sending neurotransmitters. And so they go into modes where they're isolated. So, for example, as you can see in the normal course of events, you have domains like the kitchen, and you have the front staff, and you have the guys at the door, and they say like the head, the owner of the restaurant, he's like the alien cortex. And then you can see that most of them go about their business, some shit going on in the kitchen, stuff like that. All the diners having private little conversations at tables, bigger tables, areas of the restaurant. It's very fractal and self-similar. You can see it's basically a scale-free network. So if I took a network of what was going on in the restaurant, a schematic diagram, and then I took the schematic diagram of what was going on in an individual's head, a neutral observer couldn't tell which was which. They would look the same. Now, in terms of the dynamics of it, while people are sitting in the restaurant, sitting at a table and eating, the diners are all doing their own little thing, having their own conversations and stuff like that. Now, if, say, a waiter drops a plate or something like that, be a crash, the whole attention of the restaurant will go over to that. Is everybody, what the fuck was that? And our brain works in exactly the same way. So you can see that it kind of dissolves into different domains. They all do their little thing, and then basically they can get to a point where they all align, all focused in one thing. So they do that. They basically they align and hone in on a universal focus, and then that splits up again, and then they drift off again. And it's doing that all the time. So if you could observe that, it really fucks your ego, because we have this little conceit that we're sitting here and the restaurant is some other thing. Say, no, we become part of the meta-alien cortex, I'd call it. The meta, everything has you have part of the meta primate brain, mammalian brain, and it will, coalesce, it'll break apart, it'll sometimes, the primate brain with a collection of people will be completely aligned. All the focus will be there. It's as if the other modules don't exist. Then things quieten down, they all go into their different modes. And if you can start to see that, you start to realize there's no such thing as individuality. This bullshit myth that we've convinced ourselves of, that we're individual little islands or self-centered little narcissists, it's fucking us up. Because it's not even close to true. It's kind of myth that we're trying to force. But we're about as autonomous as any eusocial insect. We're about as autonomous as a mole rat or any anthill, any ant in an anthill, and we operate as about independently as a hive of ants or bees. So it's a big blow to that fucking old ego, but a very necessary blow. And so recording your emotions and assigning a brain layer to them, and then observing, how you can how they expand and contract to being collective and then individual and unaligned and stuff. It's kind of beautiful, and you'll lose your ego quickly. You will get to the higher layers of emotions, the higher intellect and the higher emotions very quickly if you start to look kind of, in the Matrix, one of the later Matrix movies, where they had all of these kind of swarms and stuff, and then the swarm would take the shape. They did it in Finding Nemo. See the shoal of the fish? It's all, makes itself into one big fish and then comes and talks to Nemo. Do you remember that? Well, anyway, there was a thing where Nemo was on, basically.
You put the drawing up at somewhere.
Yeah, Dory and
You
Nemo
put the drawing.
thing. They start talking to this shoal of about 100 fish, and the fish are all separate and stuff. And then they say, the fish comes along and says, "Hey, is this guy bothering you?" But the whole shoal of fish forms into one big fish, and the big fish it's beautiful, because that is really quite an insight into swarm intelligence and collective intelligence. Does anybody remember that scene in Finding Nemo? It's really, really good. But there was similar stuff done in the Matrix and stuff. But if you can ever find yourself in a public place or something, and you suddenly see that, you'll definitely get to know high emotions. It's basically you'll lose yourself, and you'll suddenly get this feeling of being this collective being that's the size of a restaurant. If you can sit in a restaurant and be so identified with everybody that your head is the size of the restaurant building, and you can see no difference between all the shit going on in the restaurant and all the shit going on in your head, you'll certainly feel some high emotions. You'll certainly feel that oceanic thing. It's pure bliss. A very rare moment like that, but if you have even one moment like that in your life, it'll affect you for the rest of your life. So can't tell you how valuable it is to do that kind of exercise. Okay, but anyway,
Hugh, how does
a lot.
how does that? Remember once we were talking, and it was more or less about the most people go in, and for instance, they might all believe in some propaganda. We'll just take the example of Germany, where we're all into Jew hating, but a small percentage of people who are awake just weren't going to buy into that, and were going the other direction. So in that situation, there's some small number of people seem to be preserving an individual response. They're not connecting to the shoal of fish, so to speak. So how does that kind of fit in? Because on the one hand we're denying the individual, but on the other hand you can see that in certain cases you need the individual to see that the shoal of fish has gone crazy, and we're not going to go that way.
Yeah, you can see it in. You can make up a lot of stories about what could be going on, because you can see it in terms of evolutionary point of view, that if we all turn into lemmings, it's very important that some of us are not with the program. Otherwise, so at least we have a seed population that doesn't, head off to, into the ocean on some madcap thing that's going to destroy us all. So you need a few defectors. So you can see it from that point of view. But there's something more to say about that. And I've got to get a little bit racist here, and for the sake of the truth, there's definitely something to do with the fact that or in my view, that we white people, Europeans, are part Neanderthal and part Cro-Magnon. Half African, half extinct hominid species called Neanderthal. There's definitely I would say the Neanderthals, right? Their brains were very different because they were very solitary. They kind of I think the best way to see them is kind of autistic. So they're kind of hermits. They're kind of Greta-like. Everything's kind of black and white for them. I think that they probably have an oceanic feeling that's far less for Cro-Magnon or for sub-Saharan Africans. So sub-Saharan Africans are very much in tune with the tribe, with the rhythm, with the mood. If you've ever been in a military or something like that, you lose your individuality to a vast extent. For women in a barracks will synchronize their menstrual cycles. The more dominant the woman, she will determine, the most dominant woman in the barracks will determine the menstrual cycle, and all the lesser socially, or the females in the barracks with lesser social status will fall into that. Now, to a liberal that thinks they, autonomous, self-centered narcissist, they're repulsed when they hear that. But that's literally how it works. So now that part of us that's so tribal and so integrated with the tribe and the movement of the tribe, in an African tribe, you don't feel your own emotions. You don't really have separate emotions. You have collective emotions. You have personal emotions to a certain extent because you have a different idea, but you communicate that idea. It gets infectious. Everybody gets in on it. Everybody gets out on it. It's kind of it's more collective. The Western European, particularly male now, has this divide itself between Cro-Magnon and a Neanderthal, and they're in conflict with each other as much as the autoimmune system is in conflict with each other. So while we're busy feeling our own little feelings, you can be sitting in a corner, or you can be at a Nuremberg rally and break away. Well, that is how, if you're European, it's the Neanderthal part that's saying, like, I don't like these crowds. I want to fuck off. It has agoraphobia. Now, all these things now, Western psychologists and say, well, you've got agoraphobia. There's got something wrong with you. You say, no, you're a very healthy Neanderthal if you've got agoraphobia. I don't think you would get a Neanderthal to basically go into a shopping mall. They'd be very, very uncomfortable. And so if you go, okay, take it back to the Nuremberg rally. What you've got in the Nuremberg rally is this kind of worst of both breeds. You have this crossbreed that's the worst of both breeds. Everybody is going into the swoon of collective activity. Basically, you've got the guy on the podium. He's saying all this emotive stuff. He's getting waves of emotion back from the crowd. He's basically really stirring things up. They're feeling. Their accounts of people. It's very, very interesting to read accounts of people that were at Nuremberg rallies, and they said that women literally had orgasms standing up, full-blown orgasms standing up, and it's so scary for us to look at what went on. that even psychologists are loath to study what was going on there. It's just such a scary insight into the abyss of what humans are. But I think you can clearly see that it's a mismatch of the worst of the worst. So you're having this tribal instinct, but it's gone into an entirely new level. And so it's the Cro-Magnon's kind of collective and tribalism and this empathy and this basically the motor regions in their brain are synchronizing, and soldiers marching in formation like that. Okay, the soldiers in formation, they're in a block. That block is stimulating the alien cortex. It's a square. Basically, they're wearing boots and stuff and green uniforms and stuff. It's a pure appeal. That kind of thing is a pure appeal to your reptilian brain. So you've got the reptilian brain and the alien cortex kind of in this overwhelmed with this almost epileptic fit of indulgence in itself. And then I mean, this is not a good place to be for any animal. And so I think it was completely unnatural place to get to, and I can't sit. You're never going to get a Nuremberg rally out of a sub-Saharan African, right? If you had a crowd of Africans even running amok, or in Rwanda or something like that, it's an entirely different dynamic to what's going on in, say, a Nuremberg rally. I don't believe. I mean, I'll go out on a limb and I'll say I don't believe that Africans would do it. It's just sub-Saharan Africans. It's just not natural. It's something weird that was never supposed to happen, and it's due to this unholy alliance between Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons. Very unpopular thing to say, but the more I look at it that way, the more I become convinced of it, and the evidence stacks up in that direction. But yeah, so I think that Greta and stuff is a little bit of Neanderthal breaking away, and it's very important because I think shamans and schizophrenics, they are those guys. The shamans and schizophrenics. Shamanism is universal, runs at about 1% throughout the world, but definitely the shamans in Siberia, those guys, they're Neanderthals. They are guys who have more of Neanderthal traits in this European Neanderthal Cro-Magnon hybrid, and so they seem to break away, and they seem to be the protection for the collective going too nuts, because they defect. They don't like the crowds. They are kind of like this vestige of sanity. They say people go mad in crowds, but they get sane slowly and one by one, and that slowly is the Neanderthal part of us coming out slowly, and I mean, in terms of a Nuremberg rally, it would be coming out of the collective insanity and our destructive culture as well. We are in a kind of big Nuremberg rally with this techno euphoria and this batshit crazy planetary destruction and this culture of destruction that we're in. It's basically a large version of a Nuremberg rally that we have fused to equate the two, but they obviously the same dynamic. And so you would hope that there are a few people that would break away and head out to the jungle, and those guys would survive and repopulate the earth after the other guys went off and destroyed themselves. So yeah. So anyway, did that answer it, Gary, or did you want something?
Yeah, no. Well, I'm just wondering where to go from here. I just in what you're saying, I'm thinking back to the restaurant example, where, okay, so we've got a planetary psychosis going on, and a few people realize that but they're not just that they understand it, but they really feel it. And so they're in a crisis with their emotional response, getting overwhelmed by what they're sort of unavoidably immersed in this mess. And so they're in a situation where they're getting this emotional response, but they've got to deny it. because they're not part of they're separate from this madness. So you know, they've retained this little shamanic individuality, if you want to put it that way. I'm not sure if that's the right way to put it, but so you know, on the one hand, we're supposed to be not feeling alien from our emotions, but on the other hand, you can be in a situation like we are, where it's very powerful situation, and you've got to somehow not get swept away by it. So I don't know if that makes any sense. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I think that if you, well, I imagine Neanderthals being very sensitive, right? So okay, let's just pretend that Greta, you know, nobody can tell, but let's just pretend that Greta, as an example, is somebody who's semi-autistic, and let's just pretend that's because she